Okay, today's lesson is lesson 2, our created solar system, the terrestrial planets. First, we'll talk about the introduction to our solar system and terrestrial planets, and then we'll go planet by planet. What are you not being told about Mercury? What are you not being told about Venus? What are you not being told about Earth? What are you not being told about our moon? And the last point, what are you not being told about Mars? I'm using Spike Pizarro's called Astronomy, our created solar system. Another video I'm using by Dr. Jason Lyle is Astronomy Reveals Creation.
T-minus 16 seconds, sound suppression water system has been activated, protecting Discovery and the launch pad from acoustical energy. We have a go for main engine start. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways for international science. Discovery has cleared the tower.
For thousands of years, mankind has looked toward space. But it's been less than a century since we could actually travel there.
Discovery's roll maneuver is complete.
A few centuries ago, almost all scientists believed in the biblical account of creation. However, by the time the first astronaut launched into space, many scientists had abandoned this history. Many astronomers had come to believe that our solar system and the planets and moons within it formed all by themselves without a creator about 4.5 billion years ago. But what did we find when we arrived in space? Do the planets and moons of our solar system actually support this belief? Or are they consistent with the Bible instead? The answer to this question might surprise you. You'll discover some of the evidences that have convinced me, along with many others, that the Bible is true and evolution is not. As we tour the solar system together, we'll see stunning pictures and movies of planets, moons, and other objects. Some are our next-door neighbors in space. Others are vast distances away. We'll discover that often these objects do not support evolutionary ideas. Many of them appear to be quite young, not billions of years old. In fact, according to the current evolutionary models, many of the objects in our solar system cannot exist at all.
That's Neptune.
Now that probably contradicts everything you've heard before. You've probably been told that evolutionary astronomers have it all figured out, and that their models prove that our solar system formed all by itself billions of years ago. Well, you'll have to hear the evidence and judge for yourself. You'll discover what you're not being told about our solar system. So let's get started.
Okay, let's get started. Now, before we can discuss how the solar system got here, we need to discuss what the solar system is. So when we talk about the solar system, we're referencing, first of all, our sun, and you can see it out there right now, and everything that orbits it, okay? That's the solar system. In the next 3 lessons, we'll discuss the 8 major planets in our solar system, along with many moons. You'll find that Jupiter and Saturn have dozens and dozens of moons. Asteroids, comets, and smaller objects as well, including the dwarf planet, Pluto. So when we look at this, it's not to scale, but you can see. So let's start. A little quiz. What's the very first planet? Anybody know? The name of the first planet. Closest to the sun. Exactly. Mercury. And there it is. What's the second planet? Venus. And there it is. Third planet from the sun? Earth. And then the fourth. Mars. Yep, Mars. So that's what we'll cover today. Next week we'll start into the gas giants. So what's outside of Mars? It's a big planet. Jupiter. Yep. What's the planet that has the rings? Saturn. There's Saturn. The next one has a difficult name to pronounce. Yeah, Uranus. You're right. Yep. And you'll find this one's particular. Uranus actually has small rings, and it rolls like a ball. Yeah. And the next one? No, before Pluto. Neptune, right there. It's kind of a bluish gas giant. And then the last one, Pluto. Okay. So it's been reinstated? No, it's continued to be downgraded. It's not a planet. It's a dwarf planet. It's a special case, but we'll have, in fact, that was the most recent discovery. They really looked at Pluto closely, and that's why I'm going to spend almost half a lesson on that. The findings they found is amazing. Okay, so here is what the planets would look like if you were to line them up next to the sun. In real life, the planets are much farther away from the sun and each other. I wanted to show you how big the planets are to each other and the sun. By the way, that's Earth. You can barely see that dot. So notice how small the Earth is comparison to the right with the gas giants, and specifically compared to the size of the sun. It's like a speck. Our sun is so massive. But as you saw last week, the sun is just an average sun. There are suns that are much, much bigger out there. So the Bible says in Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. In comparison, evolution teaches the solar nebula model. And I'll play a short clip, a couple minutes, where Spike describes what evolution teaches how our planets.
Someone who believes in evolution denies the biblical account. The dominant evolutionary model today is called the solar nebula model. According to this model, our solar system formed from a swirling cloud of gas and dust about 4.5 to 4.6 billion years ago. The evolutionary story goes something like this. In the beginning, there was gas. About 4.6 billion years ago, an enormous cloud of gas collapsed and started to swirl. Most of the gas went into the middle and became our sun. The rest of it swirled around the new sun and started to condense into grains of dust. As the grains of dust orbited the sun, they started to stick together and became clumps of dust. Then the clumps stuck together to become little rocks. The little rocks stuck together to become big rocks. After enough time had passed, the gas had turned into huge asteroids. These asteroids stuck together to become the planets we see today. Astronomers have a special name for these asteroids. They're called planetesimals, which means little planets. Since you probably haven't heard this word before, I'm going to call them asteroids instead. It means basically the same thing anyway. For example, most secular astronomers believe that the asteroids we see in our solar system today are leftover planetesimals that never quite got it together to form planets. Evolutionists are confident that their model is correct. After all, it explains why all the planets orbit the sun in the same direction. It also explains why the solar system is flat today, with all the planets lining up in a disk shape as they orbit the sun. Plus, it explains why the inner planets are rocky, and the outer planets are made of gas and ice. Supposedly, the heavier rocky materials were able to condense close to the sun, while the lighter materials were more volatile and could only condense further away from the sun. Sounds good, doesn't it? The problem is that it doesn't work. It turns out that you can't build planets like the evolutionists say. You can build clumps of dust, certainly. We know that dust particles stick together. Just look under your furniture and see the dust bunnies there for proof. Well, experiments in space have shown that dust bunnies will form in a vacuum, too. The problem is that once you have big clumps of dust, and maybe even some small pebbles, they don't grow together anymore. They start impacting each other too fast to stick together. Instead, they start breaking each other up in the collisions. Gravity isn't strong enough to overcome this until after the rocks have formed into small asteroids. So, despite the fancy computer animations you see on science videos, there's no way to get from dust clumps to planets. Evolutionary astronomers know this is true. That's why you see quotes like this one in the astronomy textbooks. Once these planetesimals have been formed, further growth of planets may occur through the gravitational accretion into large bodies. But just how that takes place is not understood. And in the scientific journals, we see comments like this. The formation of planetesimals, the kilometer-sized planetary precursors, is still a puzzling process. How the first stage of this process, primary accretion, works is a fundamental unsolved problem of planetary science. So before we even discuss any planets or moons, the evolutionary theory is breaking down already. It can't produce the asteroids it needs to build the planets. Will it do any better when we examine the actual planets and moons themselves? Let's take a look and see.
So we'll start with our tour of the solar system with the planet that's closest to the sun. There's a picture of Mercury. Mercury is the first of the 4 terrestrial planets. The others are Venus, Earth, and Mars. Now, the word terrestrial comes from the word terra, the Latin name for Earth. Unlike the large gas planets, Earth is mostly rock. Since Mercury, Venus, and Mars are also rocky, we call them terrestrial planets. So Mercury is small. It is a little bit bigger than our moon that we see at night. Its surface looks like our moon. If you look at that picture, you can see craters kind of like the moon. But it's a planet of extreme temperature. The sunlit side of Mercury warms up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, we get hot when it's 100 degrees, right? Oops, that's hot enough to melt lead. The dark side of Mercury is 200 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. And that's colder than any temperature we've recorded on Earth. So the temperature difference across the planet of Mercury is an amazing 1,000 degrees. Mariner 10 was the first spacecraft sent to the planet Mercury. It flew by in 1974 and 75. It returned over 2,700 pictures during its 3 Mercury flybys that occurred nearly half the planet's surface. Back then, Mercury posed multiple challenges for evolutionary theories. One of them is they found out that Mercury is dense. In fact, its iron core is greater than 40% of its volume, and a high-density planet goes counter to the evolutionary model. One evolutionist pointed out, the driving force behind previous attempts to account for Mercury has been to fit the high density of the planet into some preferred overall solar system scheme. It has become clear that none of the proposed models work, and the high density is conveniently accommodated by the large impact hypothesis, which makes Mercury unique. So this problem was solved by the large impact hypothesis. What is that exactly? Evolutionists do believe Mercury formed the way evolution predicts. So the large impact hypothesis, Spike will talk about.
Do you remember all those asteroids that were supposedly flying around in our early solar system, turning into planets? Well, after Mercury formed in the correct way, the way that secular models predict, one of those asteroids crashed into Mercury and stripped away all the lighter material from it. The lighter stuff just wandered off into space somewhere, leaving behind the dense material that we see in the planet today. But where's the evidence for this event? Only that if it didn't happen, Mercury would disprove evolution. Obviously, this isn't a good standard of evidence. But that's not all. The Mariner probe also discovered that this little planet has a magnetic field. But according to evolution, it can't have a magnetic field.
One evolutionist has pointed out Mercury is so small that the general opinion is the planet should have frozen solid eons ago. Messenger spacecraft was the first spacecraft to visit Mercury after 30 years later. Okay, and it was the first spacecraft to orbit the entire planet. It provided an in-depth study of Mercury. It received a treasure trove of new information and created several new challenges for the secular model. We'll talk about some of this. One is volatile elements like sulfur and potassium. They found sulfur and potassium on Mercury, and this discredits the large impact hypothesis, because if there was a meteor that crashed into Mercury, then all those elements would have burned up. So a violent collision like this would have vaporized all these elements. They would have escaped into space and not be on Mercury today. But they are on Mercury today. Therefore, there was no large impact. Also, there's a high concentration of sulfur. In fact, it has the most sulfur of the 4 terrestrial planets, even more than here. The nebula theory says volatile elements like sulfur can't be there. But they are on Mercury today. Therefore, there was no large impact. Here's a quote from the book magazine Science. Chemical condensation models indicate sulfur cannot condense in the primordial solar nebula at the heliocentric distance of Mercury. It's too close to the sun. Another key, the magnetic field is decaying. The magnetic field was first measured by Mariner 10 in 1974, and then they measured it again with Messenger spacecraft in 2008 and 2009 using operational science. Okay, what did they find? The magnetic field in that 34-35 span, it decreased 8%. So it loses half its strength every 320 years. So if Mercury was really billions of years old, it shouldn't have a magnetic field today at all. Observational science shows it having a field and it's decaying rapidly. The magnetic field looks very young. Mercury was initially magnetized just a few thousand years ago when God created it on day 4. Also, the magnetic field can't be decaying for billions of years. It would have to be impossibly strong less than, say, 1 million years ago. Decaying magnetic field was also predicted by creationist Dr. Russell Humphreys, and he based his predictions before it went out to Mercury and the other planets on the Bible, and he was right. One evolutionist pointed out the old thinking was, oh, Mercury, it's just an old burned out cinder, not so interesting. Well, when they sent the next spacecraft out, they found what's called blue hollows. And this is what a scientist said. Here's this jaw-dropping thing that nobody ever predicted. So what's a blue hollow? Well, there's a picture there. It's a pit and depression a few miles across, and it formed when volatiles escape Mercury's surface, and they appear quite fresh if you look at that picture. Whatever process creates them is still going on today. If Mercury was billions of years old, the blue hollows process would have ceased long ago. So these hollows make Mercury look young. In summary, what aren't you being told about Mercury? Evolution says it can't be dense, but it is. Evolution says it can't have a magnetic field, but it does, and it's decreasing fast. Volatile elements discredit the solar nebula model, and decaying magnetic field and ongoing geological activity like those blue hollows make it look young, not billions of years old. Has anybody ever heard any of this thing before in the news at all? No, because they're hiding it from you. Messenger finds Mercury doesn't conform to theory. Mercury is not the planet described in the textbooks. So they admit it. This is 2011 quote. But what does the Bible teach? Let's go to 1 Corinthians 1, verse 27. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world, like the smallest planet, Mercury, to put to shame things which are mighty. Our next planet is the planet Venus. Now, this is an infrared picture. It doesn't look like this. Venus is cloudy, I'll show you. But Venus and Earth are very similar in size and mass. They look like twin planets. And according to the evolutionary model, Venus was formed by the same processes as Earth, at the same time and the same place, from the same materials. So, several movies in the 50s and 60s, before we were able to go out and see what Venus was like, showcase people and creatures living on Venus, which was influenced by evolution. Here's a movie from 1958 titled Queen of Outer Space. And we had American astronauts drawn by a mysterious force to the planet Venus, which they find to be inhabited by beautiful women and their despotic queen. And there's anyone here of Zsa Zsa Gabor? Anybody hear of this movie? Okay. Well, that's just one. I picked up 3 examples. The next movie was called First Spaceship on Venus. This was a 1960 movie. And when an alien artifact discovered on Earth is found to have come from Venus, an international team of astronauts went to investigate its origins. And the third one is have rocket will travel, the Three Stooges. That was in 1959. This is their full-length feature motion picture. And the plot, the Stooges are janitors working at a space center. Though a series of mishaps, they accidentally found themselves launched into space and they land on Venus. There they encounter strange creatures, including a talking unicorn and a giant fire-breathing tarantula, as well as an alien computer that has eradicated all life on the planet. See how evolution was even influencing the film industry. So Venus and Earth. Venus should be very similar to Earth. That's what evolution teaches. Venus is actually very different. This is what Venus looks like if you were flying outside it. One of the significant differences is the atmosphere of Venus. The surface temperature is even warmer than Mercury, 900 degrees. Atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide. Its pressure is so crushing at 90 atmospheres that's similar if you were under the ocean 3,000 feet deep, crushing your body. It's also so uninhabitable. Venus is the hottest planet. It's hotter than Mercury. Clouds are mostly carbon dioxide. It traps the heat and causes a massive greenhouse effect. So the clouds encase the entire planet. So the solar rays come in, they bounce off the planet, but the clouds keep them trapped in. That's why it warms up evenly at 900 degrees. And it rains, but when it rains, it's sulfuric acid. So that doesn't sound like a very nice place to go, does it? I have a short clip on the surface of Venus, what it looks like.
First of all, we've discovered that Venus's surface is not at all what evolutionists expected. Venus looks like the biblical description of Hades. There's no water anywhere. Instead, the entire planet is covered with lava flows. It does rain sometimes, but the rain isn't water. It's sulfuric acid. Also, Venus seems to have no tectonic plates. The Earth's crust is made up of many plates, but Venus's isn't. Venus has no magnetic field either, while the Earth does.
So, Venus and Earth. Now, if both planets formed at the same time, like evolution says, by the same process, from the same materials, and about the same place, why doesn't Venus have a moon like we do? But according to the evolutionary model, Venus did have a moon initially. Then something happened. Can anybody guess what could have happened?
Yes, that's right. An asteroid came along and hit it and destroyed Venus's moon. Where's the evidence for this, though? There isn't any. Only that if it didn't happen, Venus would pose problems for evolutionary theory. Venus poses other huge problems for evolution as well. For example, Venus's surface appears quite young. The entire surface appears to be fresh. There's no record anywhere of billions of years of erosion or chemical weathering. Evolutionists are forced to speculate that somehow, for some unknown reason, the entire planet was resurfaced by volcanic activity not that long ago. This means the entire planet's crust would be submerged under lava all at the same time. Why did this happen? Nobody knows. How did this happen? Nobody knows that either. But it must have happened, they say, because we know evolution is true. How long ago did this event supposedly happen? Most planetary scientists believe Venus was resurfaced about 500 million years ago. They believe this because Venus has about 1,000 large impact craters on its surface, and it would take 500 million years or so to accumulate this many craters. So even though they admit Venus's surface looks young, they will insist that it's at least 500 million years old. But they're making two big assumptions here. Number one, they're assuming they know how often new craters form today. And number two, they're assuming this rate has been the same for at least 500 million years. However, both of these assumptions have been shown to be invalid. Studies on our moon and elsewhere in the solar system have shown that the evolutionary cratering model is wrong. We see then that even though evolutionists insist Venus is old, all the evidence we have makes it look quite young.
What you aren't being told about Venus. Evolution says it should be similar to the Earth, but it's not. Think of the atmosphere. But it's different than Earth in important ways. No moon, no magnetic field. surface and crust very different. Even evolutionists admit its surface is young, and it's consistent with a younger solar system. So it only looks thousands and not billions of years old. Now we go to Earth, and I want to play Wonders of Creation from Habitable Planet, from Answers in Genesis, and I want you to focus in on, the tilt of the Earth, how that's perfectly designed for us, and our magnetic field, how it protects us, and so forth.
The Bible teaches that the Earth was specially designed by God to be inhabited. The Earth is ideally placed in the galaxy to protect us from harmful radiation. If the Earth were in the center of the galaxy, or stuck in a globular cluster outside the galaxy, radiation would be a real problem. The Earth is also the right distance from the warming rays of the sun. Our world is neither too hot nor too cold. Even the tilt of the Earth seems ideal to regulate heat. If the tilt were increased significantly, summers would be too hot and winters too cold. If the tilt were decreased, the equator would be too hot and the poles too cold. The Earth's mass determines the strength of its gravity. Unlike Mercury, our Earth is big enough to hold on to life-sustaining gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, but not so big that it is a toxic, gaseous giant like Jupiter. Life requires liquid water. Our planet sits just the right distance from the sun for water to flow as a liquid. In fact, 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered in liquid water. No other planet is known to have this essential ingredient of life. The Earth has just the right chemicals for life. About 99% of the universe is made of hydrogen and helium, but the Earth is different. It's made of heavier elements which can form compounds essential for life. The Earth has a large moon which keeps the oceans from stagnating, and a magnetic field which shields us from harmful radiation. The Earth appears to be an engineering marvel, crafted for life, the stage for unfolding God's glorious plan to dwell with man.
He formed it to be inhabited. Only the Earth. Remember that, especially when we talk about aliens. So what does the Bible teach about the Earth? The Bible teaches the Earth is spherical, not flat. Where do we find these verses? One is in Job 26, verse 10, where it says, He, God, drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. Imagine if you're out in space looking at the Earth, and you can see how dark it is at the circle versus where the actual sphere is. Isaiah 40, verse 22, it is He who sits above the circle of the earth. So that implies a spherical earth. Also, the Bible teaches that earth is suspended in space. It says Job 26, verse 7, He, God, hangs the earth on nothing. If you were to go out in space, what's the earth floating on? Is something holding it up? No, it's just out there in space. Now, it's circulating around the sun, and the gravity of the sun's keeping it there. But if you just look at the earth from space, it just sits there and hangs on nothing. Isn't that amazing? And how old's Job? Job was probably written 2000 BC. Remember we said Job was around the time of just after the flood. So this is about 4,000 years old. I have a short video. Jason Lyle talks more in depth about these points, and it'll go a couple minutes.
The basics of astronomy, things that today we'd all have to agree, like the roundness of the earth, things like that. The Bible talks about those things. It talks about the spherical nature of the earth. In Isaiah 40:22, the circle of the earth. You say, well, that might mean a flat circle, but Job 26:10 says that God inscribes a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. And that's what we call the terminator, where light stops or terminates. And that only works on a sphere. Terminator. And it's on the waters because Earth's surface is mostly water. So it's referring to a spherical planet at a time, interestingly, when most people did not believe the Earth was spherical. Isn't that interesting? If you look in most astronomy textbooks, they will generally credit Pythagoras with being the first to come up with the idea that the Earth might be round. And then Aristotle is usually considered the first to prove that that's so. But Pythagoras is 500s BC, Aristotle's 300s BC, Isaiah, written long before that, 700s BC. Job, we think, is around 2000 BC. It's interesting, isn't it? The Bible was describing the circular nature of the earth, the spherical nature of the earth, in a time when most people, the experts of the day, did not believe it. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if it was tempting for them to compromise and say, well, yeah, the Bible indicates the spherical world, but it can't really mean that because our best experts indicate that it's flat and supported by turtles or whatever it is. Something to think about. I don't know that they did that. I'm just asking the question. Earth is suspended in space. In Job 26:7, it says that God hangs the earth upon nothing. That's a wonderful description of the nature of gravity, isn't it? The earth literally hangs on nothing. Wonderful description. Might have been hard to believe when it was written. Because again, Job 2000 BC, but early Greek experts taught that the earth was a flat disk and floated in water. And wouldn't that make more sense? We see things float in water, but how can you hang something on nothing? That's ridiculous, except of course it's true. God got it right. How about that? People say the Bible's not an astronomy textbook. I know that, but it's the Word of God, and when it touches on astronomy, it's right. God knows how the universe works. He made it after all.
Earth's magnetic field is decaying. In fact, we've lost half of the magnetic field and its energy in the last 1,400 years. But that means 1,400 years ago, the magnetic field was twice as strong. You go back 2,800 years ago, it's exponential. It's 4 times as strong. But there's limitation on its past strength because the maximum age of the magnetic field can only be 20,000 years old because we're measuring that. That's operational science. And it can only be 20,000 years old, not 4.6 billion years. So the magnetic field is thousands, not billions of years old. Evolution dynamo theories can't explain this. So here's another short clip from Jason Lau about the Earth's magnetic field being young.
Earth, for example, has a magnetic field. You probably knew that. Most of you have a compass in your car or somewhere that tells you it points to north because there are currents in Earth's core that generates that magnetic field, and it actually protects us from radiation from the sun and other radiation from space as well. So it's actually a nice feature for life on Earth. Some other planets have them as well, some don't. But the interesting thing is magnetic fields don't last billions of years. They just can't because that electrical current runs down. It encounters resistance. And so we've actually been able to measure that, and we find that the strength of the Earth's magnetic field has been dropping over the past century and a half. We've been able to see that. And now we think it gets complicated during the flood year because we think that the plates would have been pushed apart and that would have caused rapid reversals in the polarity of the magnetic field. But the total energy just drops. Even during the flood year, it just continues to drop down. It's an exponential decay as far as we can tell. So it's just dropping down since creation. And if you run it backwards, you find it can't be more than a few thousand years old. If you run it back millions of years, well, it's an exponential decay. So if you run it backwards, it gets really big really fast. It'd start ripping the iron out of your blood, and that's not good. It can't be millions of years old, let alone billions. It's consistent with thousands of years. It really is.
Would you like your blood being ripped out, the iron out of your blood? So one evolutionist wrote, magnetism is almost as much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert, back in 1544 to 1603, wrote the classic text concerning magnetism, magnetic bodies, and the great magnet Earth in 1600. So despite 400 years of research, evolutionists can't figure out how the Earth could have a magnetic field. Maybe we should accept our planet was created. And let's read Isaiah 45:18, which says, "For thus saith the Lord, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, who formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other." So that's God's word. He formed this earth to be inhabited. Concerning the water, a lot of people, we talked about this last session, late last year. People may say, where's all the water from the Genesis flood? Did you know that water covers the earth today 72%? The mean depth of the seas is 13,860 feet. The average height of the land is 2,250 feet. If you do the math, the mean depth of the water is 6 times deeper than the mean height of the land. So if you raise the oceans and lower the mountains, water out there today could cover the globe 2 miles deep. So if anyone ever asks you, where's the water from the Genesis flood, just take them to the beach and say it's there. Did you know evolutionary models say all the water shouldn't be here? Volatile gases shouldn't condense in the inner solar system close to the sun. They were blown outwards. This is why we have terrestrial planets that are rocky. Water shouldn't have condensed this close to the sun. Evolutionary models show the Earth had to form with no water at all. So where did all this water come from? Evolutionists do not know. They have some guesses. They believed the Earth was bombarded with hundreds of millions of comets in its history. That's where the water came from. Because comets are big, dirty ice balls in space. They used to say this is where our water came from, but this explanation doesn't work anymore, so they went away from that. Based on spacecraft observation, comets contain some water, but their ice is chemically different from the water that we have on Earth, so it doesn't match up. So they had to throw that one out. Also, comet ice has deuterium, which is extremely rare on Earth. Therefore, our water didn't come from comets. Now, we do have another source of Earth water, and can you guess?
Asteroids as the source of Earth's water. These scientists point to asteroids like 24 Themis, which was recently discovered to have water frost and ice on its surface. They say that long ago, millions of asteroids crashed into Earth and supplied its water. But this idea runs into problems right away. Asteroids are rocky, not icy. They have far less water than comets do. And even the ones that do have some water have the wrong chemical composition to have supplied water to the Earth. As one study concluded, probably less than 15% of Earth's water could have come from these asteroids. Add it all up, and the secular model predicts that our planet should have very little water. Obviously, the secular model is wrong. As a report in Science News recently said, there's one thing on which most geochemists and astronomers agree. The celestial pantry is now empty of a key ingredient in the recipe for Earth.
So the pantry's empty. No answers. So what you aren't being told about Earth? It's uniquely designed. Remember that video, the rotation period, the axial tilt, the orbit, atmosphere, etc. It's uniquely designed for us to live here. The magnetic field is young. We shouldn't even have water. So this shows that the Earth is thousands, not billions of years old. So let's go to the moon. I have a video here, it goes about 5 minutes, where Spike talks about the moon's impact on Earth and the cratering we see.
Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour. Just having reports the clock has started. The tower is clear.
The Apollo missions to the moon were probably the highlight of our entire space program so far. Thousands of people worked tirelessly for years so that 12 men could walk on the moon and return safely home. We've all seen the moon countless times. Often, we tend to take it for granted, and we don't appreciate its beauty. But there's much more to appreciate than just its beauty. Like the Earth, the moon was created and uniquely designed for us. First of all, the moon's gravity raises tides in the Earth's oceans. This is crucial to life on Earth. The moon's tides help to circulate ocean water, which prevents our oceans from becoming stagnant. This allows fish and other creatures to live there. The moon is at just the right distance for this. If it were much farther away, it wouldn't raise high enough tides. On the other hand, if it were much closer, the tides would be too high, and they would be harmful to us. But the moon was created for more than just tides. The Bible says the moon was created for signs and seasons for us here on Earth, and it's uniquely positioned for this. As the moon goes around the Earth, it regularly passes between the Earth and the Sun. When this happens, if you're at the right spot on the Earth, you can see an eclipse. Notice how the moon blocks out the Sun exactly. The moon is 400 times smaller than the Sun, but the Sun is 400 times farther away than the moon. This makes these eclipses possible. As you see here, it also allows us to study parts of the Sun's atmosphere, things that we couldn't see otherwise thanks to the Sun's blinding light. A total eclipse is known to be one of the most awe-inspiring events in all of creation. Each time one occurs, people travel from all over the world to see it. There are well over 100 other moons in our solar system, yet none of them produce eclipses like this for the planets they orbit. Only our moon has the exact combination of size, position, and distance that produces these beautiful events.
We'll call you. Roger that.
Except for the Earth itself, the moon is the most widely studied object in our solar system. It's the only other object that people have walked on. The moon has some fascinating lessons to teach us. The side of the moon that we see from Earth is dominated by several features. The large dark areas that you see here on the surface are called maria. These are believed to be large flows of hardened lava. Here's a closer look. Notice how the mare area is smooth and lower than the rugged highlands behind it. The maria are believed to be huge impact basins. Sometime during the moon's past, some large objects hit the moon, forming these huge basins. These impacts were so severe that they cracked the moon's crust, causing lava to ooze out and fill the basins in. This seems like a reasonable explanation so far, but here's a question. How much time passed between the impacts and the lava coming out? It seems obvious that this wouldn't have taken long at all, a few hours, a few days, maybe as long as a week or two. But evolutionists believe that 500 million years passed in between the impacts and the lava. Why do they believe this? Because in many places on the moon, we can see things called ghost craters. Ghost craters are craters that are sticking up from underneath the maria. They had been partially filled in by lava, but not completely erased. That's why we can still see them. Here's another example. Notice that some craters are sharp and clear. These obviously formed after the lava filled in the maria, so these are not ghost craters. The ghost craters are the ones, like these, that are peeking up from underneath the hardened lava. These craters existed on the floors of the impact basins before the lava came and partially filled them. This means they formed after the giant impacts happened, but before the lava came out from the impacts. Here's why this is important. Because evolutionists believe in billions of years, they have concluded that, except for a short period early in the solar system's history, new craters form very slowly. Otherwise, there would be a lot more craters on the moon's maria, for example. But there are a lot of ghost craters on the moon. Since evolutionists have to believe in a slow rate of cratering, they're forced to believe that it took a good 500 million years or so for all these ghost craters to form. Does this idea make sense? No, it doesn't. Obviously, such huge impacts would have had an effect on the moon immediately. It's ridiculous to think that the moon would wait a 500 million years or so before it reacted to these collisions. The only reason evolutionists believe this is because they're committed to their billions of years. But if we look at the evidence without being influenced by evolutionary prejudices, what do we see? We see evidence that cratering rates used to be a lot higher in the past than today. And this affects our understanding of planets and moons all over the solar system. Remember, Venus's surface looks very young, but evolutionists say it's at least 500 million years old, because cratering is such a slow process. Our moon shows us that cratering is not such a slow process as evolutionists believe. And that means the planets and moons in our solar system are a lot younger than you're being told.
So as we look at the moon, many people have wondered, how did the moon get here and where did the moon come from? In the Bible, it's clear. It was created by God on day 4, about 6,000 years ago. And we read in Genesis 1:14 and 15, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and it was so." Genesis 1:16, then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. There it is again, like no big deal. 10 to the 22nd number of stars. It's nothing for our omnipotent creator. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So the moon was made by God on the fourth day to be the lesser light to rule the night. One of them. So what's the moon's purpose? It marks out times and seasons. It rules the night. It's the dominant light in the night sky. Evolutionists do not want to accept creation, so they look for other answers. Apollo moon missions in the 60s. Harrison Smith was an Apollo 7 astronaut and was the last astronaut on the moon, and there's a picture of him. He desired to determine how the moon formed all by itself without a creator. Smith brought back hundreds of pounds of moon rocks, and evolutionary scientists were eager to analyze the moon rocks to see which moon formation theory was true. So what are the origin of the moon theories that they have? There are three main theories. One is the fission theory, two is the nebula theory, and three is the capture theory. The fission theory, the early Earth was spinning rapidly and a chunk of material broke off and became the moon. There's some problems with this. Observations showed moon rocks are more deficient in iron than on Earth. They're not the same makeup. Earth would have been spinning 10 times faster than today, or once every 2.5 hours. The problem is, how did it slow down to once every 24 hours? All the excess spin energy would have to go somewhere, and it would have to raise the Earth's temperature by 1,000 degrees and boiled away all the Earth's oceans. Since we have oceans today, this theory has to be wrong. Second one, the nebula theory. Earth and moon formed out of a swirling cloud of gas and dust, similar to the evolutionary theory of the solar system, but on a smaller scale. The problems. The Apollo mission showed moon rocks are different from Earth rocks, and it's difficult forming the Earth and moon from a nebula cloud. The last one is the capture theory. The moon formed somewhere else in the solar system, and then it was traveling along, and then the gravity of Earth captured it and had it start rotating around the Earth. So the moon started orbiting our planet where it is today. Well, there's problems with that theory. The Earth can't capture the moon through gravity without interacting with other objects. The moon would have been accelerated by Earth's gravity, not capturing it. There's two options. The moon would have to hit the Earth, or the moon would zoom by and be accelerated away from the Earth. Either way, this can't happen. So what did NASA come up with? In spite of everything that we have learned the last few years, we still cannot decide between these three theories. We still need more data, and perhaps some new theories before the origin of the moon is settled to everyone's satisfaction. So what do you think they came up with?
So evolutionists needed something new. Sure enough, a new theory soon came to the rescue. Yep, it's those asteroids again. You see, billions of years ago, a really big asteroid, one the size of Mars, crashed into the Earth. Both the asteroid and the Earth were broken up in this catastrophe. Lots of material was sprayed out into space. Some of it formed into the moon, and the rest of it came back down, back into the Earth. However, the iron from both bodies sank into the Earth's core. So this explains why the moon doesn't have much iron today. So how good is this theory? Well, the media will tell you that computer simulations have proven it to be true, but that's nonsense. First of all, computer simulations can never prove anything happened, only that it's one possibility for how something might have happened. Secondly, this model only works with very narrow parameters. You need an asteroid of exactly the right size, coming in at exactly the right speed, and exactly the right angle for this to be even possible. And there's lots of debate about whether or not it works even within these narrow boundaries. Even many evolutionists don't accept this model. For example, one evolutionary astrophysicist has complained, the collision has to be implausibly gentle. You practically need someone to hold a Mars-sized object just above Earth and drop it to avoid messing up Earth's orbit. Not only that, scientists recently took a closer look at some of the soil samples that astronauts brought back from the moon. They discovered that some of the samples contain water.
water.
This was a complete shock to evolutionists. The giant impact theory says that the moon can't have any water today. It would have been vaporized and lost during the collision. As one scientist commented, "It's hard to imagine a scenario in which a giant impact melts completely the moon, and at the same time allows it to hold on to its water. That's a really, really difficult knot to untie." Thanks to this new discovery, the giant impact hypothesis is in serious trouble, and that was the only idea that was remotely possible for an evolutionary origin of our moon. Sounds like evolution can't explain where the moon came from. The Bible was right all along.
One thing that positive that came out of us landing on the moon, it's called the lunar laser ranging. There's a picture of a mirror the astronauts left on the moon. Scientists can fire a laser at one of these reflectors and have it come back, and they can calculate the moon's distance from the Earth. So using operational science, we are finding, and I brought this up last year, the moon is slowly moving away from the Earth. As the moon orbits the Earth, its gravity pulls on the Earth's oceans, causes tides. The tides actually pull it forward on the moon, causing the moon to gradually spiral outward. So the moon is actually receding or moving away from us about 1.5 inches per year. Now, it's not a big deal, and we've measured this by having those reflectors on the moon for years. So that's hard operational science showing the moon is slowly moving out of our orbit. 6,000 years ago, if you back it up, it'd be 800 feet closer. No big deal. If you back it up 1.4 billion years ago, the moon would be touching the Earth. That proves the moon was not orbiting the Earth 4.5 billion years ago. And here's a quick video of Jason Lau discussing
the recession of the moon. The moon is actually moving away from the Earth, and that's due to tidal forces. The moon induces tidal bulges on the Earth, one on the moon side, one on the other side, by the way. People say, why does it do a bulge on the backside? Well, it's pulling the Earth's center away from that ocean, is how that works. And those tidal bulges, since the Earth rotates faster than the moon revolves, right? You got the Earth spinning quickly, the moon going slowly. Well, those tidal bulges get ahead of the moon and then they pull forward on it. And the really weird thing is when you pull forward on something that's in orbit, it moves up, it moves out. That's a little counterintuitive, but if you've ever played with a gyroscope, you know that when things are spinning, it doesn't quite act necessarily the way you'd expect. But the moon is gaining energy as it moves away from the Earth, stealing a little bit of Earth's energy. Which means if you run the movie backwards, the moon would have been closer to the Earth in the past. And if you run it back 1.4 to 1.5 billion years, they're touching. In fact, they're in the same location. So they can't be that old. And you say, well, that's a long time, 1.4 to 1.5 billion years. But my secular colleagues believe the Earth-Moon system to be 4.5 billion years old. So it's an inconsistency in their way of thinking. But it's not a problem for creation, because 6,000 years ago, the moon was about 730 feet closer to Earth. Not a big deal, considering it's 240,000 miles away. Not a problem. Indication of thousands of years.
So what you aren't being told about the moon, evolution can't explain its origin. Evolution can't explain its geological activity or those ghost craters. Evolution can't explain its recession. The moon is young and designed for us, as the Bible teaches. The last planet is Mars, and I want to talk about this in an introduction here. So Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. Viking 1 was the first spacecraft that landed on Mars, and this is a picture of it, I think a computer simulation, of July 20th, 1976. Since then, many other probes had visited Mars, and we've learned significant information. Mars is a rocky desert and has dramatic terrain. Olympus Mons, this is the largest volcano on Mars in the entire solar system, and it's the same size as the state of Arizona. Mars has the largest canyon in the solar system, enormous Rift Valley. It's long as the continental United States. It's 9 times as long and 7 times as wide and 4 times as deep as the Grand Canyon. It's nearly as deep as Mount Everest is high. Formations formed by water. There are chasms and gullies, layered deposits and shorelines, and other formations water can produce. Also evidence for water geysers and other dramatic events. Mars also is a giant desert. Here's a picture before a Mars storm, and here's a picture of the dust storm engulfing the entire planet. So they have global dust storms. How could there be flooding on Mars if we have so much dust? Mars has water vapor in the atmosphere, ice at the poles, and there's a picture of some ice under the surface as well. So liquid water on Mars, well, with its current atmosphere, it's impossible today because it has a very thin atmosphere. Liquid water either evaporates or freezes quickly. That's why you see the polar ice at the top. There is no liquid water on Mars. Evolutionists continue to search for water on Mars because water is necessary for life, and evolutionists want to find life beyond Earth to prove evolution. So we need more than water for life. So how do they explain this? Well, there was a catastrophe on Mars, and let's play this.
Liquid water is impossible on Mars today. But evolutionists want a history of water there really, really badly. This creates a huge problem. And where there's a problem, you need a solution. Evolutionists believe that Mars used to have a thick atmosphere, like they want. But then an asteroid hit the planet and stripped it away. Let's think about this for a moment. Mars is a desert planet where it's physically impossible to have water. But evolutionists desperately want water there. In fact, they want enough water to flood the whole planet. So they invoke this catastrophe for which there's no evidence.
But Earth is the water planet. As we said, covered 72% by water, enough to flood the planet 2 miles deep if you raise the oceans, lower the mountains, and there's abundant physical and historical evidence for a global flood. Evolutionists, though, mock Christians for believing in a global flood, and they call it unscientific. You see the hypocrisy here. Okay, he'll talk about water on Mars versus Earth.
You'll see that evolutionists invoke catastrophes over and over again to fill the gaps in their models. And to be fair, it's possible that catastrophes have played a role in shaping the planets and moons in our solar system. After all, the Bible doesn't tell us much about the history of these objects, so we can't be dogmatic about what did or didn't happen to them in the past. Nevertheless, there's usually little evidence for any of the collisions invoked by the evolutionists.
There's a picture.
In the history of the entire solar system, there's only one catastrophe that we know for sure occurred: a global flood here on Earth. And this one catastrophe, the only one with overwhelming evidence from geology, history, and the Word of God itself, this catastrophe, the evolutionists reject absolutely. That's why in this video I'm emphasizing how often the evolutionists use asteroid collisions to rescue their models from the facts. Again and again, they invoke speculative catastrophes all over the solar system, but then they ridicule creationary scientists for using a well-supported catastrophe to interpret geological formations on Earth. And Mars is a perfect example of this inconsistency. Evolutionists are demanding watery catastrophes on Mars, where there can be no water today. Yet they mock creationists for believing in a watery catastrophe on Earth, which is covered with water today. As I said, this is utter hypocrisy. Mars is also an excellent illustration of the rank speculation that is passed off as science today. For example, perhaps the preeminent scientific journal in the world today is Nature. Nature recently ran an article with this headline: "Wheel of Spirit hints at life on Mars." The Spirit being referred to here is a small rover that we landed on Mars. So if all you saw was this headline, you'd think, wow, Spirit found evidence for life on Mars. But what exactly did Spirit find? Only a little patch of sandy material, which might be silica, which might have formed from a volcanic fumarole. And on Earth, volcanic fumaroles sometimes have bacteria in them. Bingo! We found evidence for life on Mars. Isn't this absurd? A patch of sand somehow becomes hints of life on Mars. If a creationary scientist said something half this silly, he'd be mocked and ridiculed. But evolutionary believers do this sort of thing all the time. They often come up with wild speculations, which are presented as scientific fact. Remember this the next time you hear a news story about evidence for water, or even life, on Mars, or about all the evidence we have for evolution here on Earth. Try to find out what the evidence really is. It's often a lot less persuasive than they say.
What you aren't being told about Mars. Evolutionists want a long history of global oceans on Mars, but liquid water is not possible on Mars. The global flood on Mars, but not on Earth, shows the hypocrisy of their approach, and a good example of wild speculation passed as facts. Thank you for your attention. Next week, we'll talk about the gas giants and out further into the solar system. That's it. Thank you for your attention.